He thought he'd arranged the perfect evening for his mistress, but he didn't know who was sitting at the next table. Don't forget to subscribe and post where you're watching from. The morning light filtered gently through the tall windows of the Bensons' home in the well-heeled Southcrest district, casting a golden hue across the polished hardwood floors and the pristine marble countertops of the open-plan kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faintest trace of lavender from the reed diffuser near the sink. It was, by all outward appearances, the picture of an ideal household. Sophisticated, quiet, successful. Marissa Benson stood by the stove, flipping blueberry pancakes for her two children, while the coffee machine hummed softly behind her. She wore a simple navy silk blouse tucked into tailored cream slacks, her thick, natural curls pinned neatly into a bun. Her hands moved efficiently, but her eyes, those deep brown eyes, kept straying to the clock above the kitchen doorway. Her husband, Dr. Justin Benson, was late. Again. The children, Ava and Julian, 12 and 10 respectively, were seated at the breakfast bar, chattering about their upcoming field trips and midterm projects. Their voices filled the room with warmth, even as Marissa's smile felt slightly more practiced than usual. When Justin finally entered the kitchen, adjusting the cufflinks on his custom-tailored shirt, he offered a quick peck to Marissa's cheek and a brief ruffle of Julian's hair before grabbing a travel mug from the cabinet. "Emergency consult," he said breezily, avoiding her eyes. "I won't be home for dinner. Clinic might run late again." Marissa nodded, her smile never faltering. "Of course. Be careful on the roads." He muttered something about traffic and kissed Ava on the forehead before slipping out the door. Marissa watched the door close, her hand still on the handle of the spatula. The silence that followed his departure was momentary, just long enough for her to hear the distant sound of his car backing out of the driveway, before she turned her attention back to the children, handing them their plates with gentle encouragement. Only after they were dropped off at school did the silence settle in again, heavier now, more insistent. The hum of the dishwasher and the ticking of the wall clock seemed louder than usual, the way small sounds do in moments of unease. She sat at the dining table, opened her laptop, and began scrolling through her calendar. Everything looked typical. Client meetings, a court appearance on Thursday, a lecture she was giving to law students on Friday. The normalcy of her digital schedule contrasted sharply with the creeping sense of unrest that had been growing in her for weeks. It wasn't one thing. It was everything. Justin's increasing absences, his sudden interest in grooming, the new cologne that smelled nothing like the subtle sandalwood he had worn for years. The phone he never left lying around anymore, now always face down or tucked in a pocket. The passwords that had quietly changed without explanation. But it had been the bank notification 2 nights ago that had truly unraveled her sense of peace. A $450 charge at Bianca, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, a place they hadn't visited in over a year. She had stared at the screen for a long moment, her fingers frozen above the keyboard, a nauseating chill spreading through her chest. He had told her he was at a surgical conference in Atlanta that evening. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the charge was for a client dinner. Maybe. So many maybes that had once felt plausible now felt threadbare and weak, like overused excuses finally collapsing under the weight of too much repetition. Marissa closed her laptop, stood up, and went to their walk-in closet. His shirts were still perfectly pressed, color-coded. The blue one he had worn on conference night was in the laundry basket. A familiar scent clung to the fabric, but it wasn't her perfume. It wasn't even his usual cologne. It was something new, floral, younger. She dropped the shirt back into the basket and sat on the edge of their bed, her hands resting motionless in her lap. 15 years. They had built a life together. Not just a life, an empire of trust, or so she thought. She had stood by him through his residency, had given up a senior position at a major law firm in D.C. to follow him when he was offered the lead surgical role in their current city. She had managed their household, raised their children, built her own practice from the ground up, and had done it all while being his biggest cheerleader. And now she couldn't shake the feeling that she was cheering for someone who had quietly left the game. She didn't cry that night. Instead, she lay in bed beside him as he slept peacefully, her body rigid with silent fury. She watched his chest rise and fall, his arm draped loosely across his side of the bed, his face turned toward the window. He looked innocent, relaxed, as if nothing at all was out of place. Her thoughts swirled in the dark. She could have shaken him awake, demanded answers, thrown the evidence in his face. But she knew, somewhere deep in her marrow, that it would be useless. He would lie. He would manipulate. He would spin a story so carefully crafted it might almost sound true. No, she would not give him that power. The next morning, she kissed him goodbye as he left for work, murmuring something about a deposition. He responded with the same distracted affection he'd offered the day before, unaware that anything had changed. But everything had. That morning, she didn't go to her office. She called her assistant and rescheduled her meetings. Then she sat at the kitchen table again, this time with a legal pad and a pen, and began writing down everything she knew. Every date, every inconsistency, every moment that had once seemed off but had been too easily explained away. She wasn't preparing a confrontation. She was preparing a case. Hours later, she made a call to a private investigator she had once worked with on a high-profile divorce case. Discreet, competent, thorough. She didn't have to explain much. He understood instantly. By the afternoon, she had a preliminary report in her email. Hotel reservations, flights, photos, and a name. Haley Emerson, 28. Public relations consultant. A former patient of Justin's, and judging by the matching social media photos from Cabo 2 months ago, much more than that. Marissa stared at Haley's Instagram feed, her mouth set in a hard line. Sun-kissed selfies, tagged locations in Paris, spa days, cryptic captions about finally being seen, and one particular image that made Marissa's blood run cold. Haley at a candlelit table, her fingers curled around the stem of a glass of rosé. Behind her, just barely out of frame, the corner of a navy blue sleeve in the shape of a watch Marissa had given Justin for their 10th anniversary. The caption read, "He says Friday nights are just for us." Marissa's fingers trembled for a moment. Then they stilled. She closed her laptop, stood up, and walked slowly through the house. Past the photographs of vacations, the framed law degrees, the children's artwork pinned to the fridge. The life they had built was real. The memories were real. But now it all felt like set dressing on a stage built for lies. In the living room, she stopped in front of the fireplace mantel, where a photo of their family at last year's Christmas party smiled back at her. She studied Justin's face. The smile was broad, confident, charming. She hadn't seen that smile directed at her in months. She reached up, turned the frame face down, and walked away. Later that evening, she watched from the upstairs window as Justin pulled into the driveway, greeted the kids, and entered the house with the same practiced warmth he always used. She listened to the murmur of his voice as he asked about school, about dinner, about weekend plans. Everything sounded normal, but normal had become the lie, and beneath it, something colder, more precise was beginning to take shape. She was done being the silent pillar, done being the woman who filled in the cracks in their marriage with more sacrifice, more patience, more grace. This was no longer about saving what they had. This was about reclaiming who she was. By the time the house went quiet and everyone was asleep, Marissa was already on her laptop again, making a reservation at Bianca under a different name, not for herself, but for the truth. The days that followed were a blur of sharpened awareness and cold deliberation. Marissa moved through her home with an eerie calm, watching her husband with the eyes of someone observing a stranger in a role he no longer deserved to play. Each kiss on the cheek, each polite inquiry about her day, each familiar phrase he offered, it all landed like a rehearsed line in a poorly acted drama. She answered him evenly, smoothly, with the same precision she once reserved for courtroom arguments. But inside, something had split wide open, and there would be no patching it back together with tenderness. That Monday, after the children were off to school, and Justin had kissed her goodbye with all the casual warmth of a man who still believed he was loved, she sat at her desk with her coffee cooling beside her. The private investigator had already sent a second update. She opened it without ceremony. The photographs were sharp, indisputable. Justin exiting the sleek black BMW she hadn't known he leased, Haley emerging from the opposite door, her hand tucked into his as they walked into a boutique hotel she'd driven by 100 times. There were timestamps, receipts, confirmation numbers, all of it arranged with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. Marissa scrolled through each image slowly, allowing the betrayal to settle in layers. There were no tears, only the tightening of something inside her chest, something forged from the slow compression of disappointment and rage into a single, crystalline truth. This was not a mistake. This was sustained, deliberate deceit. She clicked away from the images and opened a clean notepad on her screen. She began compiling data, dates, locations, notes from memory. She remembered when Justin had canceled their anniversary dinner, claiming he was on call for an emergency surgery. There was no emergency. He had been sipping champagne with Haley in a rooftop suite. She remembered the weekend he missed Ava's school recital because of a last-minute medical conference. There had been no conference, only a beachfront Airbnb 2 hours south and 2 margaritas photographed beside a sun hat Haley had posted on her story. With every entry, she found herself going back further, reevaluating years. The skipped birthdays, the sudden, unexplained expenses, the increasing distance between them that she had tried to explain away as the fatigue of middle age, of parenting, of work stress, but now it all reassembled into a narrative she could no longer ignore. Later that afternoon, she sat in her car outside the clinic where Justin worked. She wasn't there to confront him. She was simply studying the shape of his world, the one she had helped him build and the one he now shared with another woman in secret. She watched nurses come and go, patients arrive and depart, the glass front doors swinging open like the automatic gates of a fortress designed to keep out inconvenient truths. When she returned home, she called her assistant and cleared her schedule for the next 3 days. Then she made another call to a friend and colleague who happened to specialize in family law. They hadn't spoken in weeks, but the moment Marissa's voice broke through the line with that quiet, clipped tone that meant something serious, her friend understood. "I'm not filing yet," Marissa said, "but I need to understand all my options." And she did. Over the course of 2 hours, she was walked through the legal landscape she had helped so many others navigate: division of assets, custody arrangements, spousal support, public image considerations. She took notes, asked questions, and at the end of it all, closed her notebook with a sense of brutal clarity. There was no salvaging this marriage, and more importantly, there was no reason she should want to. That evening, she cooked dinner as usual: pasta with grilled chicken and roasted vegetables, a recipe the kids loved. Justin arrived late, claiming a delayed surgery. Marissa watched him as he set down his bag and loosened his tie, slipping into the kitchen with the ease of routine. He kissed her cheek and complimented the smell of dinner. "Busy day?" he asked. She smiled. "Productive." They sat at the table, the children chattering about school and friends. Marissa asked questions, laughed in the right places, refilled glasses of water, and carried the conversation like always. But her eyes flickered to Justin's phone when it buzzed against the counter, and this time she noticed the name that flashed: Haley. Just one word, quickly dismissed. But she had seen enough. After dinner, while Justin showered, she slipped into his office. She knew his habits well. He rarely logged out of his work email on the desktop, and tonight, predictably, he hadn't. She clicked open the inbox and typed Haley into the search bar. What unfolded before her was not just a secret, it was a life. There were emails discussing travel plans, rental agreements, dinner reservations, even a draft of a letter he intended to send to the board of his clinic, requesting a temporary sabbatical, something he had never mentioned to her. Haley's messages were casual, intimate, filled with emojis and abbreviations. She called him Babe and Dr. J. She sent him photos of outfits she was considering for their next trip. She asked him about his day, about the kids he never planned to introduce her to. She spoke of a future Marissa was clearly not a part of. Marissa stared at the screen, her heart pounding in a way that felt almost detached, like her body was reacting out of reflex while her mind moved ahead to something colder, more focused. She exited the browser and returned everything to its place. Then she walked upstairs, sat beside her husband in bed, and watched him sleep for the second time that week, his chest rising and falling, his features relaxed and unbothered. She thought of confronting him in the morning. She thought of 1,000 scenarios in which she would scream, throw things, demand explanations. Instead, she made a reservation. Not at any restaurant. At Bianca. The same restaurant where he had taken Haley. She had checked the date on one of the receipts, this Friday. Now, she reserved a table for 2 at the same time, near the private booths. She requested it by phone, speaking in the smooth, professional tone she had used for court clerks and city officials for years. The maitre d' had been polite, even accommodating. "Yes, we have a table next to the booths," he'd said. "Discreet, quiet, often used for business meetings." "Perfect," she'd replied. She hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. Then she sent an email to a contact she hadn't used in years. Nia Dorsey, a sharp, incisive journalist with a growing platform and a particular interest in public accountability. They had worked together on a case involving wrongful termination at a hospital. Nia had proven herself smart and discreet, and curious. Marissa crafted her message carefully, inviting Nia to dinner at Bianca to discuss a potential story involving nonprofit ethics and marital law. It was just vague enough to intrigue, just official enough to sound real. She sent it and waited. Nia responded within the hour. "Absolutely. Sounds fascinating. Friday at 8, Marissa confirmed, then added one more detail. "I'll be inviting a photographer, Off the record, for now. Nia didn't question it. The next morning, Marissa called in another favor. A private security consultant who had once helped her vet potential whistleblowers. She asked for quiet, discreet photography services. Just one person. Not invasive. Just watch and document. By Thursday night, the plan was fully in motion. She lay in bed, listening to Justin talk about a client dinner he had on Friday. He said it casually, as though this were just another obligation he wished he could skip. She nodded, smiled, and said she might go out too. Dinner with a colleague, she added. Justin barely looked up from his phone. That's nice, honey. 15 years of marriage, and that was all he had to say. The next morning, she stood before her closet, surveying her clothes. She selected a navy sheath dress, elegant, professional, with a subtle neckline. She laid out pearl earrings and a pair of red-soled heels Justin had once said made her look like she was trying too hard. That was the point now. After dropping the kids at school, she stopped by her stylist for a blowout, letting her curls frame her face in soft waves. She applied makeup with precision, enhancing her cheekbones and lips not to seduce, but to armor. The stylist complimented her look. Big meeting today? Marissa smiled faintly. Something like that. She went home and packed a small overnight bag, just the essentials. She placed it in her trunk and stood in her driveway for a long moment, staring at the house she had spent a decade turning into a home. It no longer felt like hers. Inside, Justin's world continued undisturbed, built on false promises and vanishing honesty. She locked the front door and slid into the driver's seat. As she drove to the salon to meet Nia and finalize the plan, she felt it, something shifting inside her. A letting go, a surrender not to despair, but to clarity. She was no longer the woman waiting to be chosen. She was choosing herself. Friday arrived with an eerie sense of stillness, like the tense hush before a summer storm. Marissa woke early, her eyes opening to the first rays of dawn, casting pale streaks across the bedroom ceiling. Beside her, Justin's breathing was slow, even, oblivious. The man who had once held her so tightly during nights of fear or celebration now lay inches away, unreachable across the chasm he had quietly carved between them. She stared at the ceiling for several long minutes, then turned, rose silently, and began preparing for the day. Every movement was measured. She showered, dressed in workout clothes, and went for a run, her feet pounding the pavement with rhythmic purpose. It wasn't to clear her head. It was to prepare her body, to remind herself that she was still grounded, still strong. With each breath of crisp morning air, the final traces of doubt dissipated. She wasn't overreacting. She wasn't irrational. She was awake, at last. By mid-morning, she was back home and sipping green tea as she reviewed her notes once more. The reservation at Bianca had been confirmed. The table requested was secured. The maitre d' had even complimented her on her timing. A quiet spot with an excellent view, he had said, unaware of the layers beneath her polite thanks. It wasn't just a view of the restaurant's fine interior she wanted. It was a front-row seat to the end of an illusion. Her email to Nia had sparked the journalist's curiosity. They would meet at 7:45, just ahead of Justin's 8 o'clock reservation. The professional photographer she'd hired, recommended discreetly by a contact at a security firm, would be there 15 minutes earlier, blending into the scenery like just another patron with an expensive camera and a fascination for ambiance. Everything was arranged, every detail locked into place with the precision of a courtroom submission. Marissa turned her attention next to the dossier she had compiled. It wasn't enough to catch Justin red-handed. She wanted the full scope of his duplicity laid bare. His personal betrayal, yes, but also his professional recklessness. The misappropriation of clinic funds, the shady transfers between personal and business accounts, the romantic getaways disguised as medical conferences. She had pieced together a trail so damning that even the most generous interpretation would still paint him as deceitful. She printed everything on thick ivory paper and placed it carefully in a leather folio. Midday passed quietly. Justin texted her once, an emoji, a thumbs up in response to a message she hadn't sent. She didn't reply. The children were spending the night at her sister's, a sleepover planned days in advance under the guise of a fun cousin weekend. They would be spared from the chaos that was about to unfold. She had made sure of that. At 5 o'clock, she dressed slowly. She slipped into the navy blue sheath dress, smoothing it down over her hips. It hugged her figure elegantly, neither revealing nor hiding. She clasped on the pearl earrings and stepped into the crimson heels she so rarely wore. Her reflection stared back from the mirror, composed, poised, distant. Not the forgiving wife, not the broken woman, someone else entirely, someone who had rediscovered her power. By 6:30, she was on the road. The traffic was light, the early evening sun casting a golden glow over the downtown skyline. She parked a block from the restaurant, her overnight bag still tucked discreetly in the trunk. She wouldn't be returning home tonight, and she felt no sorrow in the knowledge. Bianca sat on the corner of a cobbled boulevard, its facade understated, elegant, the kind of place that didn't need to advertise its exclusivity. Inside, soft jazz played beneath the low hum of conversation and clinking glasses. The maitre d' greeted her with the warmth reserved for longtime patrons. "Mrs. Elliot," he said, using the name she'd booked under. "Your table is ready. Would you like a moment at the bar first?" "Yes," she replied, offering a slight smile. "Just a drink to start." She perched at the marble-topped bar, ordered a dirty martini, and let her eyes casually scan the room. The lighting was dim but warm, casting every table in flattering light. To her right, beyond a pane of frosted glass, she could make out the outlines of the private booths, circular leather seating, designed for intimacy and discretion. She sipped slowly, counting the minutes. At 7:42, Nia arrived. The journalist was dressed in sharp, business-casual style, fitted blazer, sleek slacks, a notebook peeking from her crossbody bag. She looked slightly confused at first, but when she spotted Marissa, her expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to concern. "Marissa," she said, embracing her lightly, "you look incredible. Is everything okay?" "Let's sit," Marissa said. "I'll explain everything once we're at the table." They were led to their table, perfectly situated with a view into one of the private booths. Marissa sat with her back angled slightly, but with a full line of sight. Nia, still playing catch-up, opened her notebook but said nothing. The photographer had already taken his place across the restaurant. He didn't look toward them. He didn't need to. His lens would see what Marissa had prepared it to see. At 7:58, Justin walked in. Marissa's pulse did not quicken. Her hand did not tremble. She simply noted his entrance like a judge watching a defendant take the stand. He was wearing the charcoal gray suit she'd had tailored for him 2 birthdays ago. His movements were brisk, confident. He paused to greet the hostess, then followed her to the booth. 2 minutes later, Haley appeared. She was younger than the photos had conveyed. Her blonde hair fell in effortless waves, and she wore a red silk dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her heels clicked confidently on the tile floor. When she reached the booth, Justin stood, smiling in a way Marissa hadn't seen in years. He kissed her cheek, then helped her into her seat. They leaned into one another like lovers in a film. Marissa turned her gaze back to Nia, who had begun to realize what she was witnessing. "Is that?" Marissa nodded once. "That's my husband." Nia blinked, stunned. "And the woman?" "His mistress." Nia was silent for a long moment. Then she reached slowly for her water glass. Marissa opened the folio and slid it across the table. "You'll find this story more compelling than you imagined." Nia glanced through the pages. Financial records, annotated photos, correspondence. She looked up again, the sharp light of the journalist now firmly back in her eyes. "You want this public?" "Not yet," Marissa said. "Tonight, I just want it witnessed." They turned back to the booth. Justin was laughing now, pouring wine into Haley's glass. They were oblivious, utterly engrossed in each other. Marissa watched the way he leaned in, how his hand brushed Haley's arm, how easily the performance came to him. Her stomach turned, not from jealousy, but from disgust. How many times had she seen him smile that same way over dinner with her, all while already planning his next weekend escape? Then came the moment. Haley reached across the table, took his hand, and leaned in for a kiss. It was light, teasing, but enough to ignite the final charge of Marissa's plan. She rose slowly. Nia began to stand, but Marissa motioned for her to stay. "Watch," she said. Her heels clicked steadily across the floor, drawing the attention of only a few patrons. She paused at the edge of the booth just as Haley was laughing at something Justin had whispered. Both looked up. Justin froze. Haley tilted her head, confused. Marissa met her husband's eyes and saw, for the first time, true fear. He opened his mouth to speak, but Marissa turned to Haley, her voice calm and clear. "Haley Emerson, I presume?" Haley blinked, startled. "I'm sorry, do we—" "I'm Marissa Benson, Justin's wife." The color drained from Haley's face so quickly Marissa almost pitied her. Almost. "Not here," Haley whispered. "Please." "Why not here?" Marissa's voice remained even. "It's a lovely restaurant, romantic lighting, expensive wine, and apparently just private enough to live a double life." Justin finally found his voice. "Marissa, please, let's just—" She turned to him with a look so sharp he fell silent. "This," she said, sweeping her hand over the booth, "is what you chose, and now you're going to sit in it." Behind her, the photographer captured every moment. Marissa held their gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to her table. She sat with the same grace she'd exhibited when she first arrived. Nia looked at her, stunned into silence. "Dinner's on him," Marissa said quietly, lifting her glass. "It always has been." For a moment, after Marissa returned to her seat, the restaurant seemed suspended in stillness, as though the air itself had paused to absorb the weight of what had just occurred. The hum of conversation continued, but more subdued now, interspersed with whispers and discreet glances towards the booth where Justin sat frozen, his mouth slightly parted, eyes darting between Marissa and Haley. Across the table from Marissa, Nia blinked, her pen hovering over her notebook, unsure whether to document or remain silent. But Marissa didn't speak. She lifted her glass to her lips with a hand so steady it might have belonged to someone discussing a corporate merger, not dismantling a marriage in front of a crowd. Haley had gone pale, her face now a stiff porcelain mask beneath the dim restaurant lights. Justin leaned toward her, whispering urgently, but she shook her head with sharp, panicked movements. It was clear the damage had landed. Marissa had not screamed. She had not cried. She had not thrown a drink or raised her voice. And yet the destruction left in her wake was absolute. The photographer caught it all. His lens, discreet from a distance, captured the exchange in crisp stills. Marissa's calm approach, Justin's frozen reaction, Haley's dawn in horror. Each image would later become part of a private archive, a visual testimony of betrayal and control reclaimed. For now, they were simply documentation, a record of the truth. Justin rose from the booth a few minutes later, haltingly, like a man staggering through the aftermath of an explosion. He approached Marissa's table slowly, each step weighed with hesitation and confusion. He stopped just short of her seat, standing as if awaiting permission to speak. "Marissa," he began, his voice low and hoarse, "what are you doing here?" She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Having dinner." This isn't what it looks like," he said, as if the words themselves had any meaning left. "It never is," she replied. Then she gestured subtly to the seat beside Nia. "Would you like to join us? My guest has some fascinating reading material, if you're curious." He glanced at the open folio on the table, then at Nia, who gave him a politely raised eyebrow and said nothing. He hesitated but didn't sit. "I think we should talk," he said. "I agree," Marissa said, "but not here, and not tonight." Justin's jaw flexed the way it did when he was flustered but trying to mask it with restraint. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. "I'll take care of the bill." "Oh, I'm sure you will," she said coolly. "You seem comfortable covering these types of expenses." He flinched. Marissa returned her attention to her drink, signaling the conversation was over. Justin stood for a moment longer, helpless, then turned and walked back to his booth. Haley was no longer there. Marissa watched him look around with increasing panic. A few seconds later, he pulled out his phone and began frantically texting. The muscles in his neck twitched. He reached for his wine glass but didn't drink. It was as if the booth itself had become a cell and he its prisoner. Marissa allowed herself one long breath. Nia leaned forward slightly. "You don't want to publish this," she said, not as a question but as a thoughtful observation. "Not yet," Marissa replied. "You're not just after exposure." "No, I wanted the truth out in the open, where it could breathe." Nia nodded. "Well, it's out now." They finished their meal in relative silence. Marissa ate slowly, methodically, like a woman nourishing her strength for what was still to come. When the check arrived, it had already been settled. A server, avoiding eye contact, simply left a folded slip indicating the charges had been cleared by Dr. Benson's card on file. Marissa closed the folder without comment and gathered her things. Nia stood with her. "Do you want company?" she asked gently. "No," Marissa said, offering a small, grateful smile. "I think I need to sit with myself tonight." Outside, the city buzzed with late-night energy. Marissa walked slowly, her heels clicking against the stone sidewalk, the cool evening air brushing against her bare arms. Across the street, the Grand Meridian Hotel loomed elegant and tall, its glass doors glowing warmly beneath a canopy of soft lighting. She crossed at the light and entered without hesitation. The woman at the front desk greeted her with recognition. "Welcome back, Mrs. Elliott. Your suite is ready." "Thank you," Marissa said. "Please don't connect any outside calls to my room." "Of course." Inside the elevator, she exhaled deeply. Not with relief exactly, more like a controlled release of pressure after hours of holding tension beneath a calm exterior. When she reached the suite, she stepped inside and set her bag on the bench at the foot of the bed. The room was tastefully decorated. Muted tones of gray and gold, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline, a plush, king-sized bed with impossibly soft linens. She didn't undress immediately. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her heels, and stared out at the glittering expanse of lights below. Somewhere out there, Justin was undoubtedly unraveling, chasing Haley, rehearsing excuses, calculating his next move. But none of it mattered anymore. Not to her. Eventually, she moved to the bathroom and washed her face, removing the carefully applied makeup, revealing the tired eyes beneath. She slipped into the hotel's robe and poured herself a glass of water from the minibar. Then, she sat in the armchair by the window and allowed herself to feel. It came not as a storm, but as a deep, hollow ache, one that rose from the pit of her stomach and spread slowly, like heat. She had spent months, maybe years, holding back this pain. She had told herself to be patient, to be kind, to be understanding. She had rationalized, minimized, deferred. And now, finally, it all caught up to her. She wept. Not the delicate tears of romantic drama, but the guttural sobs of a woman unburdening herself of betrayal, of disappointment, of the slow erosion of love that had once been her foundation. She cried for the 15 years she had given him, for the countless ways she had tried to hold everything together, for the image of a marriage that had never truly been whole. When the tears subsided, she felt hollowed out, but not broken. Empty, but somehow cleaner. She wrapped the robe tighter around herself and crawled into bed. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Morning brought a new kind of clarity. She woke early, showered, dressed in soft black slacks and a white blouse, and gathered her things. She left the suite as quietly as she had entered it and drove to her sister's house to see the children. They were still in pajamas, laughing over cereal and cartoons, unaware of the seismic shift in their mother's world. She hugged them tightly, kissed their foreheads, and promised they would go for ice cream that evening. Back home, Justin's car was in the driveway. Marissa's stomach did not twist. Her hands did not shake. She entered the house, found him sitting in the living room in the same suit from the night before, his shirt wrinkled, his face pale and unshaven. "Marissa," he said as she walked in. She said nothing. I ended it with her," he said quickly. "Last night. It's over. It was a mistake, the biggest mistake of my life." She regarded him for a moment. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," she said. "A mistake is misplacing a check. What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again." He ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't myself. I was under pressure. Stop." He did. She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "You weren't sorry when you were booking flights to Cancun. You weren't sorry when you skipped our anniversary for a weekend in Napa. You weren't sorry when you told our children you had a meeting while you were renting apartments behind my back. You're only sorry now because it's no longer a secret." "I'll do anything," he said. "Therapy, counseling, full transparency." "It's too late for transparency," she said. "You've already shown me everything I need to know." He stood suddenly, pacing the room. "You're not even going to try? 15 years, Marissa." She stood too, matching his height. "I tried, Justin. I tried every day for the past 5 years while you drifted further and further away. I carried this marriage, and you gutted it." He stared at her, searching for something. Pity, doubt, softness. He found none. She walked to the console by the stairs and picked up an envelope. Inside were copies of the divorce papers. She placed it gently on the coffee table. "You need to leave," she said. "You can come back for your things during the day when the children are at school. We'll figure out the rest with lawyers." His face crumpled. "You're really ending this?" She met his gaze. "You ended this, Justin, the night you chose her over me." And with that, she walked away. The day after Justin's failed attempt at reconciliation passed with a numb sort of clarity. Marissa moved through her home like someone sorting through the debris of a demolished structure, not to rebuild, but to recover what little might still be hers. She packed away her husband's belongings into neat boxes labeled with cold precision. Dress shirts folded sharply, ties coiled like sleeping snakes. A pair of cufflinks she had gifted him on their 5th anniversary, still in the original case. She placed them in the box without hesitation. Each item was a token of a man who no longer existed in her life, only a shadow that once pretended to love her. He did not return that night, nor the next. She had made it clear that the locks would be changed, and she meant it. The locksmith arrived early Monday morning and worked in efficient silence. Marissa offered him coffee, which he politely declined. When the final bolt clicked into place, she felt a strange sense of finality. This was no longer a shared home. It was hers now, hers and the children's, a sanctuary reclaimed. Word of the scene at Bianca traveled faster than Marissa had anticipated. By Tuesday, 2 of her colleagues at the firm had gently approached her with concerned glances and softened tones, inquiring if she was all right. She answered plainly, without elaboration. Yes, she was fine. She did not volunteer details, nor did she engage in speculation. But the whispers grew louder. Her assistant, Camilla, finally broached the subject in private. "Marissa," she said, her voice low, "I know it's not my place, but it's all over social media. Someone posted photos. You don't look bad in them. If anything, you look powerful. But still, people are talking." Marissa thanked her for the discretion and asked that any calls from journalists or media outlets be redirected immediately. She had no intention of becoming a spectacle, no matter how sensational the story had become. And it was sensational. A high-profile surgeon, a younger mistress, a calm, calculating wife exposing them both in a 5-star restaurant. It had all the ingredients of a modern morality tale, one the public couldn't resist devouring. Haley disappeared first. According to a former mutual friend, she had quietly resigned from her PR firm 2 days after the confrontation and deactivated all her social media accounts. Justin, it was said, had tried to contact her repeatedly. Whether he was begging for forgiveness or simply clinging to the last remnants of his double life, Marissa didn't know. And she didn't care. By the end of the week, Justin's clinic had placed him on an indefinite leave of absence pending an internal audit. Though Marissa had not gone public with the documents she possessed, word of financial misconduct had trickled out. The board, made up of conservative investors and reputation-conscious partners, had little tolerance for scandal. He had built his image carefully, but, like all things built on sand, it crumbled quickly. One evening, as she was reviewing case notes in her study, Marissa received a call from her attorney. "He's trying to delay the filing," her friend said flatly, "claiming emotional distress. He wants mediation first." Marissa closed the file in front of her and leaned back in her chair. "Let him try," she said. "I'm not interested in dragging this out, but I won't be bullied into leniency because he's suddenly ashamed." "He's not ashamed," her friend replied. "He's exposed. That's different." Marissa ended the call and stared at the ceiling. She had known Justin for almost 2 decades. She had believed in him, believed in the family they had built, the future they were supposed to share. But what she had come to understand, painfully, irrevocably, was that Justin had always believed in something else entirely: himself. That weekend, she sat down with the children. Ava and Julian were older than they looked. Sharp, intuitive. They had noticed the silences, the absence, the tension that hung in the air like invisible smoke. Marissa sat with them on the living room couch, her hands folded, her voice steady. "Your father and I are separating," she said. "It wasn't an easy decision, but it's the right one. For me. For you." Ava looked down at her hands. Julian blinked hard. "Is it because he lied?" Ava asked quietly. Marissa hesitated. "It's because he made choices that hurt our family, and some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But you need to know this is not your fault, and we're going to be okay." Julian looked up at her. "Are you mad at him?" Marissa nodded once. "I was. I probably still am. But that's my job to deal with. Your job is just to be kids." They hugged her tightly. That night, she held them both as they drifted off to sleep in her bed, the warmth of their small bodies anchoring her to something real, something unshakable. The following Monday, Marissa returned to her office with renewed focus. She had clients who needed her, women navigating custody battles, facing restraining orders, protecting assets from vindictive ex-husbands. She poured her energy into her cases, her mind sharper than ever, her instincts keener. It was strange, she thought, how pain could clarify purpose. It was during a lunch meeting with a nonprofit leader that the next idea took shape. The organization, a support network for women leaving abusive relationships, needed legal counsel for a pro bono initiative. Marissa listened intently, asked questions, then proposed something more ambitious. "What if we created a fund," she said, "not just for legal help, but for transitional housing, childcare, therapy?" The woman blinked. "That would take serious money." "I know people," Marissa replied, "and I have time." In the weeks that followed, she reached out to her contacts, former clients, donors, colleagues. The response was overwhelming. Women, especially, rallied to her side. They had seen the photos, heard the whispers. Some had lived versions of her story. Others had simply admired her poise. They contributed, connected, volunteered. She named the fund Phoenix House, because that was what this was. Not just an ending, a rebirth. Justin, meanwhile, grew increasingly erratic. He showed up at the house unannounced twice, only to be turned away by security. He left flowers on the porch, notes in the mailbox. Marissa never responded. She documented everything and forwarded it to her attorney. When the divorce papers were formally served, he refused to sign immediately. He called her one last time. "I made a mistake," he said, voice cracking. "No," Marissa replied. "You made a choice, 1,000 little choices. This is just the consequence." He hung up, and that was the last time she heard his voice. 3 months after the confrontation, the divorce was finalized. The house remained hers. The clinic shares were split, but Justin's name was now synonymous with scandal. His social circle had contracted. Former allies distanced themselves. Haley never returned. Marissa stood in the master bedroom one evening, now redecorated in shades of sage and gold. She stared out at the backyard where the children played, laughter echoing faintly through the open windows. She had imagined this moment for months, not as triumph, but as peace. She had not sought revenge. She had demanded accountability, and in doing so, she had found herself again. The next morning, she received an email from a television producer requesting an interview. They wanted to talk about resilience, dignity, betrayal. She declined. The story wasn't for entertainment. It was her life. That same day, Nia emailed her with a question. Do you want to publish it now? Marissa considered it. Then she typed, Not yet. Let the silence say what I no longer need to. She closed her laptop and stepped outside, sunlight warming her face. She was no longer waiting to be healed. She was healing. No longer waiting to be chosen. She had chosen herself, and that was enough. It began with a quiet morning, the kind Marissa used to take for granted. The kind where the house still hummed with sleep as the sky slowly brightened through the sheer curtains in the kitchen. She stood at the stove barefoot, wearing one of Justin's old button-downs, now repurposed as her favorite robe, and stirring oatmeal while the sound of Ava's soft humming drifted in from the living room. There were no urgent footsteps, no clatter of a briefcase, no murmur of excuses about early surgeries or missed flights. The silence no longer echoed with absence. It vibrated with calm. It belonged to her now. The transformation hadn't happened all at once. It wasn't a single dramatic moment where everything snapped into place, but a slow accretion of decisions, boundaries, and reclaimed space. After the divorce was finalized, Marissa had taken the children on a small trip to a cabin 2 hours outside the city. Just the three of them. No schedules, no phones, no glances at the clock. They had played board games by the fire, told stories, hiked through wooded trails, and fallen asleep to the sound of owls calling across the trees. Ava had said one night as she lay with her head in Marissa's lap, "You laugh more now." It had hit her harder than anything Justin had ever said. When they returned, she hired an interior designer, not to erase Justin's memory, but to remake the space in her own image. The house was still familiar, but it had been reborn. The living room was painted in calming tones of blue-gray and cream. The bedroom was stripped of its heavy curtains and dark woods, filled now with soft linens, brushed brass, and warm light. In her study, a photo of her and the children stood proudly beside an award she'd received for her pro bono legal work. She had never displayed it before. It had seemed boastful then. Now it felt like truth. The nonprofit project had flourished faster than she expected. Phoenix House had begun as an idea, something she had pitched during a lunch meeting to help others when she could barely help herself, but it had evolved into something more. She held meetings with city officials, partnered with real estate investors willing to donate transitional housing units, and coordinated with trauma counselors and job training programs. Women from every corner of the community reached out to volunteer, to fundraise, to share their stories. Marissa became a symbol, not because she asked to be, but because she refused to flinch. There were still difficult days. Days when the weight of the past crept in through the back door of her thoughts. When she would catch the scent of Justin's old cologne on someone in the grocery store and feel an involuntary tightening in her chest, or when she received emails addressed to Dr. and Mrs. Benson from mailing lists that hadn't yet been updated. Sometimes she allowed herself to sit in that space for a moment, to acknowledge it, to mourn the life she thought she had. And then she stood up and kept moving. She began attending a yoga class every Saturday morning at a small studio near the lake. Not for exercise, though that came with it, but for stillness. The instructor, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a gravelly voice, always ended each session with the same words: "Let go of what didn't serve you, make room for what will." Marissa took that to heart. She stopped apologizing for setting boundaries. She stopped diminishing her own needs to accommodate others. She stopped explaining. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, she ran into someone unexpected. It was in the courthouse lobby just as she was leaving a custody hearing. A man in a gray overcoat held the door open for her and offered a polite smile. Marissa blinked. It took her a full second to recognize him. It was Marcus Bellamy, an attorney she had worked with briefly during her early years at the firm. They had once co-counseled on a housing discrimination case years before she married Justin, when her ambitions still outpaced her certainty. He had gone on to work in civil rights litigation and now headed a small firm that specialized in constitutional advocacy. She hadn't seen him in over a decade. "Marissa Brooks," he said with a surprised grin, using her maiden name instinctively. "Benson," she corrected automatically, then she paused. "Actually, Brooks again." His smile deepened with understanding. "It's been a long time." They walked out together under a shared umbrella. The conversation flowed easily, their memories overlapping in warm flashes. She found herself laughing in a way that startled her, soft, unguarded. When he asked if she had time for coffee, she said yes. They sat by the window of a quiet cafe, rain streaking the glass beside them, and talked for nearly 2 hours. Not about past relationships or broken marriages, but about their work, their dreams, their children. She learned he was divorced too. No scandal, just distance. They had grown apart. There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. He didn't ask for her number. He didn't flirt. When they stood to leave, he simply said, "It was good to see you. I hope it won't be another 10 years. She nodded, smiling. She felt no urgency to make it anything more. Sometimes the most meaningful encounters weren't romantic. They were reminders of who you used to be and how far you'd come. Weeks passed. One evening, as she prepared for a donor gala for Phoenix House, Ava stood in the doorway of her bedroom, watching her slip on earrings. "Are you going to marry again?" she asked, not accusatory, just curious. Marissa turned, brushing a curl from her face. "Maybe," she said, "one day, but only if I meet someone who adds to our life. Not someone I have to shrink myself for." Ava nodded, seemingly satisfied. "I think you're already happier now." Marissa kissed her daughter's forehead. "I think you're right." At the gala, she delivered a speech that was not rehearsed but spoken from the marrow of her lived truth. She talked about strength, not the kind that comes from bearing pain in silence, but the kind forged in fire, shaped by loss and honed in clarity. She spoke of how women were often expected to endure quietly, to forgive endlessly, to preserve appearances, and how reclaiming your voice could be the most radical act of all. The audience rose to their feet when she finished. She saw familiar faces, strangers, donors, volunteers, all standing not for a performance, but in solidarity. In the crowd, she caught a glimpse of Nia the journalist standing with her arms crossed and tears in her eyes. Later that night, she received a message from Marcus. Just a simple line. "I heard your speech. It moved me. I'm proud to know you." She typed back, "Thank you. That means more than you know." They met for lunch the following week, then dinner, then again. There was no rush, no pressure, just companionship, just conversation. They shared books, movie recommendations, stories of courtroom chaos. One night, walking side by side along the riverfront, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. They paused beneath a lamppost, the city lights reflecting off the water. Marcus looked at her and said, "You seem at peace." "I am," she said quietly. That night, as she tucked Ava and Julian into bed, she felt the most profound sense of fullness. Not because her life had returned to what it was, but because it had grown into something entirely new. She was no longer simply a wife, or an attorney, or a mother. She was herself again, whole, not despite what she had lost, but because of what she had found on the other side of losing it. She stood at the bedroom door, watching her children sleep, and whispered to herself, "I made it." And she had. Marissa hadn't expected to see him again, at least not so soon, not like this. It was a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air carries the faintest edge of winter in its breath, and the sky turns a deeper shade of violet long before nightfall. The city was awash in gold and burgundy, leaves swirling in soft chaos across sidewalks and car windshields. She was standing by the buffet table at the retirement gala for one of the city's longest-serving judges, sipping sparkling water and listening to a colleague recall a courtroom blunder with theatrical flair when she felt the shift. That sudden, unmistakable sense that someone was watching her. She turned, slowly, and there he was. Justin stood across the room in a cluster of familiar faces. Former co-workers, civic leaders, board members. He was dressed in a suit that hung a little looser on him now, his posture less assured. His hair was thinner, a few more grays visible at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. The room carried the buzz of polite celebration, but between them there was only silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marissa felt the heaviness of it, not with pain, but with a quiet resignation. Time had done what time always does. It had worn the edges down, not enough to forget, just enough to stop bleeding. Justin gave her a nod, small, tentative. She acknowledged it with a glance and turned back to the conversation at her side, but she knew. It was only a matter of time before he came over, and he did. 20 minutes later, as the crowd thinned near the patio, she felt him approach. His voice, when he spoke, was soft, measured. "Marissa." She turned slowly, her face calm. "Justin." "I wasn't sure if I should come over, but I wanted to say something." She gestured slightly toward the open patio door. "Out there. Not here." They stepped outside into the cooler air, away from the lingering clinks of champagne glasses and murmured speeches. The night wrapped around them like a curtain, the hum of traffic far below muffled by the height of the building. He didn't speak immediately. He looked out over the city, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. She waited. "I never apologized properly," he said finally. "Not really. I was too busy trying to salvage what I'd already destroyed." Marissa didn't interrupt. She had no need to fill the silence. "I was selfish," he continued, "arrogant. I thought I could have everything, that I deserved everything, and I didn't see what I was doing to you until it was far too late. And even then," he shook his head, "even then, I only cared about what I was losing, not about how I had failed you." She watched him quietly. The words were not excuses, not this time. There was no pleading in his voice, no offer of repair, just the stripped-down truth, fragile and too late. "I've had a lot of time to think," he said, "after everything. The clinic, Haley, the silence. And what I keep coming back to, what I can't get away from is how easily I took you for granted, how much I relied on you to carry the weight I never even tried to lift." Marissa's eyes didn't soften, but they steadied. "I know." He turned to face her fully then. "You look at peace, happier." "I am." "With someone else?" She tilted her head slightly. "With myself?" He gave a bitter, almost laughless smile. "You always were better at standing alone. I just never noticed." "That's not true," she said. "You noticed. You just mistook it for something you could use." His expression crumpled slightly, the briefest crack in his carefully composed face. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted to say that I see it now, everything. And I'm sorry." She nodded slowly, letting the words settle in the air between them. She didn't need to forgive him. She had moved beyond the place where his remorse mattered. But still, there was something in hearing it spoken aloud, a closing of the loop. "I hope," she said after a long pause, "that you figure out who you really are, and that when you do, you live like someone who understands the cost of your choices." He nodded once, and then again, slower. "You seem to have found yours." "I'm building something," she said, "day by day, brick by brick." He looked back at the city lights, then stepped back. "I won't bother you again." "You never did," she replied evenly. "Not really. You just disappeared too slowly to notice." He opened his mouth to say something more, but whatever it was died on his lips. Instead, he gave her one last nod and walked away, swallowed by the warm light of the ballroom and the murmur of other people's conversations. Marissa stood outside for a moment longer. The cold air tugged at the hem of her dress, teasing against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, not to protect, but to hold. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt finished. Inside, Marcus was speaking to the event organizer, laughing at something someone had said. He wore a simple navy suit, his tie slightly askew, and when he caught sight of her through the glass doors, his face lit up, not with the desperate brightness of someone trying to impress, but with quiet affection. She stepped back in and walked toward him. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "More than okay." He offered her his arm, and she took it. They left the gala together. There were no cameras, no whispers, no spectacle. Just two people moving forward. That night, as they walked home beneath the canopy of stars, she found herself thinking not about Justin or the past, but about the woman she had become. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but whole. Marcus squeezed her hand as they passed under a lamppost. "You're quiet," he said. "I was just thinking," she replied, "about how the worst night of my life somehow brought me here." He stopped, turned toward her. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" She considered the question, her gaze drifting toward the sky. "No," she said softly, "because sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you really need." He smiled, brushing his thumb lightly against her knuckles. "I'm glad you booked that table," he said. She laughed quietly. "So am I." They kept walking. Behind them, the city pulsed on. Ahead of them, something new waited. Not perfect, but honest. Not the fantasy she once clung to, but a reality she had chosen, shaped, and claimed for herself. Sometimes betrayal isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the painful beginning of a better one. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out our other videos for more powerful stories like this one, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.